Ladies, thank you for coming in.
Thank you.
I think it's only fair that because the story that we're talking about is about two, I was going to say grumpy old men, but to an extent, they are old men, Peter as well as Trevor. It's appropriate. I've got ladies in here trying to adjudicate who's right and who's wrong. But of course, the court will also do that.
Yes.
Can I start with you, Sarita?
Yes, of course.
My diagnosis as a journalist watching this from outside with no interest whatsoever in the outcome of this is that what we are witnessing here is a failure of governance, which comes, of course, to your province. Am I correct?
So I think as I mentioned to you before, I think the facts will play out in the court, and it is within the court. The case has been postponed until Thursday, so we'll see a lot more coming through. But from pure governance theory perspective, there are a couple of issues. One being conflicts of interest, to the robustness of the discussions at a board level and how decisions were taken. Three, the levels of trust between the board and the CEO.
Yeah.
Four, Peter Moyo has also brought an application to declare the board delinquent directors.
Yeah.
So there are quite a few governance issues that are playing out at the moment.
Absolutely.
So from a theoretical perspective,
Yeah.
that's what we're seeing.
Absolutely. Snesipo, your thoughts?
I agree with Sarita. I think this for me is primarily a governance issue, and the question of conflict of interest and how do we manage conflict of interest,
Yeah.
whether it be from a lending relationship or whether it be through or, as Peter Moyo likes to call it, triple conflicts of directorship membership.
Right.
Yes, so it's for me, it's how the greater question this thing has brought into light, and I think when you review the recent corporate scandals that have and have been in the public space, a big question has always been the management of conflict of interest, as well as how do you manage related party transactions, because for me, I think at this point, there is no one that is innocent.
Yeah.
There's been
Until obviously the court pronounces.
Yes, but there's also been, as questions such as shareholders need to have asked themselves, is how the board of Old Mutual governs.
Yeah.
How does it operate? Because these levels of conflicts of interest on all parties raise serious questions.
Yeah. Can we isolate this to a systems failure or a governance failure at Old Mutual? Or should we ask a wider question about the failure of South African corporate governance systems? I'll take your view first and then I'll come to you.
So South African corporate governance systems, I think it's not a issue of the law as well as the regulation. I think the bigger issue has to do with application and how boards have generally functioned. In each of the scandals, it's always been apparently held by one person, some CEO, wayward CEO, acting nefariously, and the board just going along with it. Now, with Old Mutual specifically, the questions are of the fact that there's the issue of the NMT capital.
Yes.
However, as we all like to be reminded, Old Mutual is a co-founder
of
and
NMT.
and anchor investor of NMT Capital. This was known prior to the appointment
And
of
approved
Peter
by the board.
and approved by the board, and it was prior to the appointment of Peter Moyo.
Right.
So for me, that was a known conflict. And
so this is Old Mutual per se. Shall we forget Steiner for the moment?
Yes.
Can we pin the blame here
Yes.
on Old Mutual systems?
We've got
and
to
individuals?
So for me, if you do not want an issue of governance issue where there's a lending relationship with an executive member, you simply should not appoint them. Why are you entering? Why are you having to go through the extra effort of managing this conflict of interest? Whereas the simple, like I think Mervyn King says it best when he says, if it appearance, governance as well as transparency is a function of appearance and perception.
Absolutely.
So I have to agree. I think in South Africa, we've got a good governance framework.
Do we?
We do.
Well, it's
We've
been
got
shaken, hasn't it?
It has been shaken, but it is the application, again, of those governance principles that is called into question. So we have the form, and it's the substance now that we need to look at. So if you look at it, we've got the Companies Act, which is very clear in terms of conflicts of interest. We've got King 4, again, very clear in terms of the recommendation on conflicts of interest and how to manage it. Old Mutual themselves, according to the media, have come out and said that they had put processes in place to manage the conflicts of interest. And it is a fact of life that you are never going to get an ideal ideal situation where there is actually no conflict of interest.
Yeah.
It's one is what's the materiality of that conflict?
Yeah.
You know, and it's almost like putting it in on a 2x2 grid and saying if it's there,
Yeah.
then it's like how you do risk management. Then
Yeah.
you do away with it.
Yeah.
Otherwise, you treat it and you mitigate against it. So it boils down to how effective those controls were.
Yeah.
I think the other issue is around whether or not we invoke the provisions of the Companies Act, we invoke the provisions of King 4, because it's there.
Yeah. So it is a systems failure at Old Mutual. And I think
I don't know if it's a systems failure yet.
Okay.
I would say that.
Okay. I'll change that and say it's individuals who are failing to implement the system. It appears on the surface to be the case.
It's a human factor. So you can have the best policies in the world
Yeah.
around conflicts of interest and processes and shareholder agreements, etc.
Yeah.
But again, it's how do you implement it?
Yeah.
Who monitors it?
Yeah. And I suppose what it also brings into play is the whole question of the composition of these boards that we have in South Africa. And then secondly, the issue of, I think the complaint over the years has been that this is a closed club. If you are in one, you are likely to get into the next one. And if you are outside, you are unlikely to get in because this is a closed circle. Does that validate that criticism?
Yes, because it's sort of like in South Africa, we've got very much an incestual relationships, as I like to call them, because you've got a cluster of certain elite and certain directors who happen to have common board alliances with certain shareholding parties, certain business owners, and they're sort of like flavor of the month situation. Yeah. It's, for me, I think one of the big things within Peter Moyo's affidavit is that he's not only wishing to declare the chairperson of Old Mutual as delinquent, he is naming the entire board because the entire board agreed to his actions.
Absolutely. And quickly, does that bring the light onto you and the Institute Board of Directors? Because these are people I would imagine that you have been involved with in terms of training and who are members of the IOD.
So the IOD is a voluntary organization. So unless they become members, you know, we can't force them to become members. It's very different with Alltex directors, you know, where they're forced to go through the training and understand governance and the listings requirements, etc. On the main board, there's no such thing. To the point on whether or not, you know, we have the same people rotating, that has been a criticism. The IOD is working very strongly on trying to understand what is causing this. I can say that we do have a vacancy category on our website, and we have the most amazing candidates that come through that process. In addition to going through the certified director and chartered director designation, which professionalizes being a director, not just because I know you or I know you and we're going to serve together on a board.
Absolutely. There's work to be done. Ladies, thank you for coming in.